We gather around in cozy bars and tell each other stories for companionship and fun. And I am reminded of how both companionship and fun weren't things that I could pursue for a long time. You see, when I enrolled in college as an international student, I contended with a purgatory of insane expectations. I spent my first 3 years being a good immigrant girl. Honor roll every semester, serious internships only, majors in business and statistics. I was an adult with responsibilities. I wasn't here to make friends. To save up money to send home, you need a job, and jobs require visas, and visas need authorized employers, and authorized employers will only hire people with stellar GPAs. This is the law. I did what I could to ensure success, which is to say, I studied very hard and I did little else. That is, until my senior year. That's when I said, fuck it. Joined a Ceramics 101 class and became dead set on building a penis as tall as a border collie. I didn't care for creativity or for letting loose. I just wanted to have lower stakes. The ceramic studio was a quiet place, solemn, no room for shenanigans. You stepped in to immerse yourself, headphones in ears, hands in the clay, mind on the art. At best, I was relieved by the soothing boredom of playing with clay. At worst, I was frustrated by the woo-woo of making art. I built cups and bowls, a sad ashtray, an unmemorable pot. All semester long, my tired, underslept brain would daydream to imagine itself just submerging into the vats of recycled clay, like sinking into quicksand, begging for rest. Our ceramics instructor made a big deal of untethering the mind and finding the spirit in every assignment. But the most spiritual thing anyone could think to build that semester was a ceramic bong. I think I was fucking tired of looking for my spirit in an ashtray, and so I descended into a sort of manic madness. My feelings were all over the place those final months of college. I dropped a sponge one day and I cried. I missed a deadline and I burst out laughing. And when the final ceramics assignment was announced, I decided to run with a chaotic moment of originality. For the final, each student would be randomly assigned one of the 7 deadly sins and be expected to build a conceptual piece representing that sin. Inspiration struck at the wrong moment. I heard our instructor say 7 deadly sins, and immediately I thought giant penis. Even before I'd picked my deadly sin out of the hat. Why a giant penis? You'd have to ask Freud. Perhaps with all the studying and work, I'd been catering to my rational ego, but my id craved a different kind of stimulation. Perhaps a sculpture is just a sculpture? What I do know is that my background research for this absurd assignment soon led me to the story of Marcel Duchamp. Marcel was an artist who was tired of pretentious art and decided to make a toilet his entry into a prestigious art exhibition. Now, urinals at the turn of the 20th century were about the same as the urinals of today. Marcel had done the equivalent of buying a toilet at Home Depot and presenting it to the MoMA. It was all very subversive, a big avant-garde fuck you to the ruling class. Marcel said the toilet represented everyday objects raised to a work of art by the artist's act of choice. So clearly, when I built a 2-foot-tall phallus during my final semester in Ceramics 101, on a spiritual, metaphysical level, I was channeling Marcel Duchamp. At least that's what I retroactively claimed. My pisser, too, would be an everyday object raised to a work of art by my act of choice. I will have you know that building a dick is an easy punchline, but it is considerably more complicated in execution. Real peckers, for example, don't have to stand perfectly upright on their balls. The center of gravity is off when built in clay. The scale is off. You have to reimagine what can be. Push beyond the frontiers of possibility. It won't surprise you that it is very easy to find reference pictures of boners online. I spent several happy afternoons Googling dildos and strap-ons. I didn't bother to imitate the few wieners that I'd seen in person. Real dongs, you see, are human. Dildos, however, thrust past the limitations of fleshy imperfection. I built a crumpled paper core and smoothed a clay shaft over it. It stood tall and proud and circumcised. I overlaid thin coils of clay that veined their way from perineum to frenulum. I carved each gentle wrinkle at the base. I used the back of a silver spoon to burnish the head to smooth, shiny perfection. At one point, about 3 weeks into the project, the testicles I was building cracked off. And I spent an age tenderly rejoining them with a slurry of clay and water that I massaged on with my finger. You think I'm bawdy. You think that I like toilet humor. But you're wrong. Marcel and I, we are poets. Usually, there was no gentle chatter in the studio while people worked. It was each ceramicist to themselves. Once I started building my sculpture, however, people took notice. They'd look up from their own work, gaze a wander, casually look over to my table, look elsewhere, and then do a double take. Subtle but unmistakable. The phallus on my table was an anomaly. Other students were forming delicate filigree of wrathful flames, combining glazes to replicate the gleam of prideful gems, coiling a green-eyed snake eating itself in jealousy. But I was different. I had BDE. As a tribute to Marcel's work, I painted the effigy a shiny porcelain toilet white. It was an entire week into the build before someone tapped me on the shoulder to say, is that, And I nodded, proudly. I had created a conversation piece. People would ask what I was working on, what class I was in, how I was going to get my sculpture to fit in the kiln. Regulars smiled at me. We nodded silent sups. After several months of working alone, I was making friends. Studio mates and I gravitated away from our individual workstations and towards the large communal tables in the center of the room. We'd talk about the obvious, anatomy, dick jokes, but also about love and about food and dorms and gen ed. People would come for my cock, but stay for the conversation. I will be honest, until that semester, I don't think I'd realized how lonely I'd been. But when I had to move my piece from table to drying rack, 3 people helped lift my load. The outrageousness of my project had created a community that I hadn't known was possible. I made more friends that semester at that studio table than I had at any other point in my college career. Giddy with the newfound popularity of my penis project, I decided to lengthen its scope, if you will. I wanted to go beyond what Marcel had done with his urinal. My art wasn't just some silly jape, it was a testament to community. So in the weeks before kiln firing, I set my bisqueware out on some plastic sheets, laid out a selection of paints, and tacked on a post-it that said, "This is bathroom art, scribble away." I'll admit I expected some doodles, a sort of phallic yearbook of people's signatures. But what I received was even better. Within days, my sculpture burgeoned with thoughtful graffiti. We had quips in Spanish, in English, and in Hindi. Everything was obvious and delightful. A signature by someone named Richard Dickerson right under the ridge. The words, "Pen is mightier," along the shaft. A hurried sketch of a bratwurst tucked between nuts and soup. A lazy scribble read, "Studio member 69." Someone had actually painted their lips in red glaze and left a lipstick imprint on the shaft. I don't recommend that last thing, by the way. Glazes are absolutely toxic and not meant to be ingested. Even accidentally, even for surrealist art. When the final piece came out of the kiln, smooth and hard, its body gleamed like subway tile, and my studio mates' ink sprawled over it like markers on the bathroom wall of a dive bar. Lurid pinks and greens and blues, zingers and zest, melty red-pink stamp of lipstick. It was the most glorious thing I'd seen. An irreverent, fully reverent, sacred act of community. It was evocative as fuck. For myself, I learned that when I was not desperately clawing my way towards emotional and financial safety, the way that I'd been for the last 4 years, I was at my core a goofball. I did things for the bit. I liked a good laugh. I liked having people to laugh with. Getting good grades had made for a nice transcript, but a lonely existence. The real D was the friends I made along the way. My installment was a hit at the final showcase and ultimately received an A-. My instructors said they liked the concept, but my execution could be improved. The 7 deadly sins are supposed to be vile traits, things to avoid. I'd come to college assuming that friendship and fun were also somehow bad, distractions to stay away from. And now I was discovering what we all eventually find out, that sinning is what makes a life worth living. The ceramic phallus spoke not only to the assignment itself, but to this whole gang of weirdos who'd spent the time of their lives coming together to raise this barn, to pitch this tent, erect this stick. 2 years ago, the Smithsonian discovered a letter from Duchamp. It reads, "One of my female friends, under a pseudonym, had sent a porcelain urinal as a sculpture." You see, Marcel submitted the urinal on behalf of his friend Elsa. The two of them got a photographer friend to take pretentious pictures, and then a journalist friend had it featured in the national papers. It took a gang of weirdos to come together to erect that dick, too. Gluttony was the deadly sin I'd pulled out of the hat. Sitting at the communal studio table amongst new friends, I thought of conversations and gatherings and feasts, of abundance and plenty and laughter. It's like meals with overfilled plates, too much turkey, wobbly jelly, mashed potato. I thought of sloshing red wine, of ice cream, of contended burp, and reaching again for the spoon. Like, no room for dessert, but also a separate stomach for dessert? Pie doesn't count as lunch. It's its own meal. We can make space. Gluttony makes me think of excess, of a life lived in decadence, of moving away from the drabness of desperation and choosing abundance and joy instead. The sculpture served as my bedroom doorstopper for some years before it anticlimactically exited my life. I had to move cities and I left it on a curb. I changed my mind an hour later and ran to bring it back in, but someone had already picked it up. I like to imagine that it serves as a table centerpiece and carries on bringing friends together in laughter and companionship. I didn't find my spirit in an ashtray that semester, but I did somehow infuse it into a 2-foot-tall ceramic schlong. The only token I have in memoriam is the title card we used as the showcase. It reads, hand-built ceramic. I like to think that Marcel and I would have been friends.